Well, I mean, he threw 2 more picks today and another near pick to Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I know 2 of the balls were intended for Gage Larbadan on the near pick and the second pick he threw. And the first one was intended for Tylan Wallace. So, I think that is sort of a tough day when you're throwing picks when you haven't been. But also, I think when you're not with the starters, that is, take it with a grain of salt a little.
2 interceptions, another ball that nearly went the other way, and suddenly the quarterback competition that is supposedly almost settled does not look nearly as comfortable as Cleveland might want it to look. The real question is not whether Deshaun Watson can survive one rough practice. It is what the Browns do if Shedeur Sanders keeps giving them reasons to reconsider the plan.
Now, let's take a look at the QB tracker on the day. Shedeur Sanders, 17 of 25, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Deshaun Watson, 11 of 16, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions with the 2s. So you threw 2 interceptions to backups today. But he's the starter automatically. Whatever, man. Whatever. This whole thing is rigged. Now, Ashley Bestad.
Those practice numbers are exactly why this debate refuses to disappear. The tracker presented here had Sanders at 17 of 25 with 3 touchdowns and no interceptions, while Watson was listed at 11 of 16 with 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. One practice does not decide an NFL depth chart, and anyone pretending that it does is overselling the evidence. But one practice can increase pressure when one quarterback is producing clean results while the player widely expected to open the season is giving the defense opportunities. And there is another detail worth separating immediately. Calling dropped passes sabotage is the source host interpretation, not an established fact. Jerry Jeudy dropping a throw hurts the quarterback's practice result. That does not prove intent. What matters for this competition is simpler. Sanders cannot control every catch, every personnel grouping, or every coaching decision. He can only keep putting playable football on tape. But the part that should actually interest you comes later, because the strongest argument for Watson is not these practice statistics at all. It is buried in what the Browns appear to value from the position, and that may explain why Sanders can have the louder day without automatically moving to the top of the depth chart.
You know what, guys? I don't think you're calling it too soon. I will say it just kind of has felt like it was going to be Deshaun Watson's week 1 job since Todd Monken said he was going to start that first preseason game against the Bears. I thought that was significant, especially knowing this second preseason game that he's been saying Shedeur was going to start is coming after a joint practice. And everyone knows that those preseason games after joint practices are essentially...
That is the first major clue. Ashley Bastock's read was that Watson's Week 1 status began looking significant when Todd Monken named him to start the first preseason game against Chicago. Her point about Sanders starting the following preseason game matters too. That opportunity comes after a joint practice when veteran participation in the actual game may be reduced. So there are really 2 competitions happening at once. Fans naturally watch completions, touchdowns, interceptions, and explosive throws. Coaches also watch who is being prepared with which unit, who gets the rehearsal that most resembles the regular season plan, and how the offense functions before the ball is even thrown. That distinction creates the tension. If the Browns have already leaned toward Watson internally, Sanders is not merely trying to win a statistical comparison. He is trying to become so difficult to ignore that the structure of the competition itself has to change, and that is much harder. A coaching staff can explain away a practice interception. It can point to protection, receiver depth, an incorrect route, a defensive disguise, or a situation being tested deliberately. What becomes harder to explain over time is a pattern in which the younger quarterback repeatedly creates the more dangerous offensive plays while the presumed starter remains dependent on the argument that he is simply executing the system. That is why the next clip changes the conversation.
The next bar for Deshaun to clear.
I think for me, it would be seeing can this guy still make game-changing plays, because I agree with you, Nick. That was kind of my exact read on the situation. Again, I think he did the game manager stuff that he needed to do. He did the sort of procedural stuff. He led drives that led to points on the board, even though he himself did not throw a touchdown. So those are things we know matter to Todd Monken as he's installing a new offense. But for me, the next step would be, okay, can he get back to making, obviously, these explosive sort of plays that you just obviously need to be able to do if you're a functioning offense in the NFL.
Listen carefully to the standard being established there. Nobody is saying Watson needed to look spectacular immediately. The first benchmark was professionalism. Operate the offense, handle the procedure, move the team, get points on the board, and avoid looking overwhelmed when real contact arrived. That is a completely defensible standard for a veteran quarterback in a new offense. The problem is that clearing the first bar only creates a second one. Can he still make the game-changing plays? That phrase is where Sanders enters the argument. Because if Watson's advantage is experience, command, and the staff's apparent comfort with him, Sanders needs a counterweight. Explosiveness can become that counterweight, not because every deep completion proves he should start, but because the NFL eventually forces quarterbacks to create outside the clean structure of a play. Third and long, a protection breakdown, a safety sitting on the first read. A game where the running attack disappears. Those are the situations where simply operating correctly stops being enough. And notice how different this is from saying, Sanders had better practice stats, therefore he has won the job. That would be too easy. Quarterback evaluations are not box score contests. What matters is whether his best traits attack an area where the other quarterback still has something to prove. According to Bastock, those explosive throws have been visible. That means Sanders has found a legitimate lane into this competition. If Watson gives the coaches the steadier floor but Sanders begins showing the more threatening ceiling, the Browns eventually have to decide what kind of offense they actually want. That choice matters far more than one August depth chart announcement.
In the air, that is the next step. And, to Shedeur Sanders' credit, I think, he stayed in this competition and has remained enticing because he can make throws like that throw he made to Luke Floria, like the one he made to Gage Larvidan, where they are these explosive plays, and those look good. So I do think we just need to see that sort of thing from Deshaun Watson on top of all this game managing stuff. But I agree. I mean, the first step was seeing, does this guy just look totally rattled when he's out there and actually getting hit? And, I don't think he did.
There is the contrast in plain language. Sanders has remained relevant because he has produced throws that look different. Explosive plays give coaches something they cannot manufacture with rhetoric. They show up on film. But Watson also passed an important psychological test in that preseason appearance. He did not look rattled simply because defenders were allowed to hit him again. That matters, especially for a player whose recent seasons have included injuries and heavy scrutiny. So if you are evaluating this fairly, both sides have evidence. Watson has the veteran experience and appears, based on Bastock's assessment, to have the inside track for Week 1. Sanders has the kind of flashes that keep forcing his name back into the discussion. Neither conclusion requires a conspiracy, and this is where the early middle of the story gets more uncomfortable for Cleveland, because the longer Sanders plays well, the less useful it becomes to frame the competition entirely around who starts the opener. The more important question becomes what happens after the opener. A quarterback can win Week 1 and still fail to own the season. Bastock explicitly drew that distinction, and it may become the key to the entire Browns quarterback story.
I think when Deshaun Watson was named that starter, when he went out there and did the game managing type of stuff, that it really just, to me, sort of solidified the Week 1 job for him. Now, I'm saying the Week 1 job because I still firmly believe we're going to see both these guys start games at some point this season, especially when you consider Deshaun Watson's injury history. But yeah, I mean, I know they don't want to call it yet. I think they have their reasons for...
That is probably the most consequential statement in the entire discussion. Week 1 does not necessarily mean all 17 games. Bastock said she firmly believes both quarterbacks could start games during the season, specifically mentioning Watson's injury history. That changes the stakes for Sanders immediately. He does not need every argument resolved in August. He needs to remain ready enough that when the depth chart is tested, the coaching staff trusts him with the offense. That sounds obvious, but it affects how you evaluate every rep from here. If Sanders enters a preseason game after several veterans have already finished their meaningful work, the scoreboard alone will not tell you everything. Coaches will be studying protections, timing, coverage identification, operation of the huddle, decisions under pressure, and whether the quarterback creates positive plays without introducing unnecessary chaos. The public sees touchdowns. Coaches grade the route that should have been thrown before the touchdown ever became necessary. That is why the fastest way for Sanders to force the issue is not to chase spectacular highlights on every snap. It is to combine the highlightability Bastock referenced with enough routine execution that coaches cannot dismiss the explosive plays as isolated flashes. If he does that, the argument changes from the rookie made some exciting throws to the offense might actually have another viable option. Those are very different conversations, and for Watson, the challenge is almost the reverse. Nobody needs him to prove that he understands how professional football works. His challenge is showing that the version Cleveland is preparing to start can produce more than procedural competence. That brings us back to the 2-interception practice, because even the reporter who described it as rough immediately added context that cuts against the hottest interpretation.
That is sort of a tough day when you're throwing picks when you haven't been. But also, I think when you're not with the starters, that is, take it with a grain of salt a little bit. We've seen that throughout camp with both guys. So, and also the thing about today's practice, it just kind of felt like nothing overall. Like, I don't know how much stock I would put in today just because of that. It felt like they were in shorts. You didn't see some key veterans out there or key veterans who just were not doing a lot today. So I really think everyone's kind of saving it for tomorrow, and it just wasn't a good, hard-fought day overall is kind of how I would characterize.
This is the part that disappears when training camp numbers get turned into verdicts. Bastock called it a tough day, but she also said the quarterbacks were not working with the starters and described the entire session as relatively light. Key veterans were either absent or doing limited work, with the team apparently saving more intensity for the joint practice. That context matters. A training camp interception is evidence. It is not a final judgment. The same standard should apply to Sanders. A touchdown in practice is positive evidence. It is not automatically proof that the Browns are making the wrong decision if they start somebody else. Where the numbers become powerful is through accumulation. If Watson repeatedly turns the ball over while Sanders repeatedly protects it, then small sample eventually stops being a sufficient answer. If Watson cleans that up and starts generating the explosive plays the staff wants, then a bad afternoon becomes exactly what Bastock suggested it may have been. One bad afternoon. This is why quarterback controversies become so emotional. Fans want each rep to settle the argument because uncertainty is frustrating. NFL staffs operate differently. They can carry uncertainty for weeks because they have information the public does not see. Installation meetings, protection checks, private grading, medical information, play call responsibility, and the quarterback's command inside the building. None of that means coaches are automatically right. NFL staffs make quarterback mistakes every year. It simply means the case has to be stronger than "my quarterback won today's stat line." Sanders' real opportunity is to build a case that survives that deeper examination.
Let me get it right for y'all, man. Okay, you got Shedeur dropping back, wide open. Dude, come on, man. Jerry Jeudy, this is nasty work, bro. You got to catch the ball. It's right there in your hands. It's literally in your hands. This dude is sabotaging Shedeur Sanders, man. I'm calling it out. If it was Deshaun Watson throwing that to him, he would have hung on to the ball. Now, look, the ball's just all on.
Now go back to that dropped pass. The source host sees the ball hit Jeudy's hands, sees it fall incomplete, and immediately frames it as Sanders being undermined. Strip away the accusation and the football point underneath it is still useful. Quarterback evaluation is partially dependent on other players finishing the play. A perfectly placed throw can become an incompletion. A risky throw can become a completion because a receiver makes an extraordinary adjustment. A quarterback can lose a protection because somebody else misses an assignment or receives statistical credit for yards created almost entirely after the catch. That is why coaches use film rather than a spreadsheet alone, and ironically, that can help Sanders if the tape consistently looks better than the raw result. If a receiver drops a well-thrown ball, the staff does not erase the quarterback's correct read from its evaluation. They can grade the process independently from the box score, so Jeudy does not have to be sabotaging anybody for the moment to matter. The relevant question is whether Sanders is putting the football where it should go. That is a much stronger argument because it is testable. And this brings us to the title question people keep dancing around. If Sanders is producing these plays, why does Watson still appear positioned to start? The answer is not as dramatic as the whole competition is rigged, but but it may be more revealing.
Game-changing plays, because I agree with you, Nick. That was kind of my exact read on the situation. Again, I think he did the game manager stuff that he needed to do. He did the sort of procedural stuff. He led drives that led to points on the board, even though he himself did not throw a touchdown. So those are things we know matter to Todd Monken as he's installing a new offense. But for
the Browns appear to be placing significant value on offensive operation, game management, procedure, sustaining drives, getting the offense into scoring position, executing the architecture of a new system. That is the late payoff. Watson can have a statistically ugly practice and still retain the edge if the coaching staff believes he gives them the most reliable command of the offense they are installing. Sanders can outperform him in visible categories and still remain behind if Cleveland believes the rookie's total command is not yet as advanced. But there is an expiration date on that argument, because he operates the system better is persuasive only if the system produces. Once real games begin, process and production have to meet each other. If Watson is clean before the snap, but the offense cannot generate explosive plays, cannot finish drives, or keeps putting the defense back on the field, fans will not care that the operation looked professional, and coaches eventually cannot care either. This is why Sanders' position may be stronger than it appears even if he does not start Week 1. Every successful practice and every explosive throw increases the quality of the alternative available to Cleveland. Think about how different the pressure feels when a struggling starter has no credible option behind him compared with when the backup has already created momentum in camp. The starter is no longer competing only against the defense. He is competing against the possibility sitting on his own sideline. That can change how quickly a coaching staff reacts. It can also change the atmosphere in the stadium, which Watson was directly asked about.
this has kind of transitioned for me.
Deshaun told you guys at the podium today he doesn't care whether or not he gets booed or the fan reaction to when he actually gets in the game on Saturday. Do you feel like he does care, in fact, what the fans have to say?
You know, I think that's sort of the $1 million, $230 million question, if we want to say that, because I say this all the time with players. I think when they talk to us, when coaches talk to us, they want to act like these guys can shut anything out, right? And I think to a large extent they can. I think most of them are pretty elite at compartmentalizing. You have to be. But at the same time, my argument is nothing exists in a vacuum. So he can say he doesn't.
Watson saying he does not care about boos is exactly what you would expect an NFL quarterback to say. A veteran cannot walk to the podium and admit that crowd reaction controls his decision-making. Bastock's response was more nuanced. Players become elite compartmentalizers because they have to. But, as she put it, nothing exists in a vacuum. That becomes important if Cleveland's quarterback situation turns volatile. Imagine the difference between hearing frustration when the backup is an unknown and hearing it when the backup has spent August stacking productive practices. Every Watson mistake could bring louder calls for Sanders. Every Sanders success could increase the expectation that the staff should make a move. That is not necessarily fair to either quarterback. But it is real. The Browns cannot choose their starter based on applause or boos. If they do that, they are surrendering football decisions to emotion. At the same time, they cannot pretend the environment has no effect on the team. Players hear it, coaches know it exists. Reporters ask about it because everybody in the stadium can feel it. The only sustainable solution is production. If Watson plays well, the noise loses leverage. If he struggles and Sanders continues showing growth, the noise gains evidence. And evidence is the distinction that matters. Fan frustration alone should not change a depth chart. Fan frustration attached to a measurable performance gap is much harder to dismiss. That is why the Browns may want this competition to feel settled before Week 1. Uncertainty has a way of expanding the moment adversity arrives.
I mean, the Browns have to have at least some curiosity about how he's going to handle that. I keep thinking about that Todd Monken answer after the Bears game on Saturday, where he sort of acknowledged the frustration that fans have had with Deshaun Watson in the past, right? So I think the team is obviously aware. It would be hard not to be aware, but I think I don't know the answer to exactly how he's going to handle that. I think we're going to have to see over this.
The team is aware of the frustration. Bastock referenced Monken acknowledging it after the Bears game, and that awareness creates another layer to the decision. Cleveland is not just evaluating two quarterbacks in a sterile practice environment. It is preparing one of them to stand in front of a fan base that is going to react to every possession. That creates a fascinating strategic problem. Do you value the veteran's experience precisely because the atmosphere may become difficult? Or do you eventually decide that the younger quarterback's energy and explosive ability give the offense the better chance to change the atmosphere? There is no universal answer. The Browns have to learn it through actual football. And this is why I would resist both extremes right now. Saying Watson has already proven he deserves the entire season is premature. Saying Sanders has already been robbed because of training camp numbers is also premature. What is no longer premature is saying Sanders has given Cleveland a reason to keep evaluating. That matters enormously for a young quarterback. Once the staff believes there is only one playable option, the competition effectively ends. Once two players can credibly run the offense, every week becomes another data point. The pressure then shifts to the quarterback with the job. Watson does not merely have to be better than the worst-case version of Sanders. He has to be good enough that Cleveland has no compelling football reason to explore the alternative. That is a higher standard than simply surviving camp.
Actually, I thought it was interesting. He cleared the first bar for me on this last Saturday. I said I needed him to look like a professional quarterback, right? I needed him to go out there and just kind of be. He didn't need to be spectacular, and he cleared that bar, by the way. But I think it's interesting because there are a couple more bars from where he is now, or that after that first bar, to where he was in Houston in 2020. What's the next bar for Deshaun to clear?
I think for me, it would be seeing, can this guy still make...
Look like a professional quarterback was the first bar. Can he still make game-changing plays is the next one. That progression tells you exactly where this competition goes from here. For Watson, procedural competence cannot be the final destination. The Browns need chunk gains, third down solutions, red zone execution, and plays that alter games. The specific practice session in this source does not answer whether he will provide those things when the season begins. For Sanders, the challenge is turning flashes into reliability. Explosive throws get attention, reliable quarterbacking earns trust, and trust is ultimately what determines who stays on the field after the depth chart graphics disappear. That is why the next joint practices and preseason work matter even if veterans sit out portions of the games. Coaches can create difficult situations deliberately. They can test protection communication. They can force a quarterback to solve pressure. They can see whether a big play came from a repeatable read or a broken structure. If Sanders keeps responding, the Browns' decision becomes more difficult. That is exactly what he should want. Not a social media victory, not a practice stat championship, a difficult coaching decision. Because once coaches feel uncomfortable keeping you off the field, your leverage has changed.
For him. Now, I'm saying the week one job because I still firmly believe we're going to see both these guys start games at some point this season, especially when you consider Deshaun Watson's injury history. But yeah, I mean, I know they don't want to call it yet. I think they have their reasons for why they're not. But to me, it certainly feels like...
And that is where the whole story lands. Watson can be the probable week one starter, and Sanders can still be very much alive in the larger quarterback picture. Those statements are not contradictory. The mistake is treating the opening day depth chart as if it settles everything that comes after it. If Watson starts and plays efficient, explosive football, Cleveland's choice becomes easy. Sanders develops behind him, waits for his opportunity, and the controversy cools naturally. If Watson starts and the offense stalls while Sanders has already built a strong preseason resume, the Browns will face a completely different level of pressure. Then every earlier practice rep becomes part of the case. Every explosive throw people clipped in August gets replayed. Every question the staff avoided answering comes back with more urgency. And if Sanders eventually gets his chance, then his evaluation starts over too. The protection will be faster. Defensive coordinators will attack his weaknesses. Regular season windows shrink. The throws that looked easy against backups may disappear. He would have to prove that the qualities generating excitement now survive NFL game planning. That is the fair standard. So forget the idea that one dropped pass proves sabotage, and forget the idea that 2 interceptions in a light practice automatically erase the veteran's position. The more important development is that Cleveland appears to have a real alternative taking shape. That is where the pressure comes from. Sanders does not need the Browns to declare him QB1 tomorrow. He needs to keep narrowing the distance between promising young quarterback and player the coaching staff believes can win regular season games. Watson does not need to win a debate on television. He needs to make the Browns' presumed decision look correct once the football becomes real, and Cleveland does not need to satisfy either quarterback's supporters. It needs to identify which player gives the offense its best combination of command, explosiveness, decision-making, and consistency. Now you have to choose. If Watson opens the season as the starter but the offense struggles early, should the Browns give Sanders his chance quickly, or should they commit to Watson long enough for the new offense to settle in? Put your choice in the comments, and if you want this quarterback battle followed rep by rep without turning every practice throw into a fake certainty, like the video and subscribe.